Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm excited to talk to Evan Miyakawa about college basketball. Evan, what's going on, man?
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. Definitely, Miami is an interesting team. I've been monitoring them both through my eye test and through this analytics perspective, so I'm excited to dive into it.
Yeah, so for people that don't know, you run a website based on analytics and data. There's a lot of things that I like that I've been a fan of and kind of reached out to you a couple years ago about the things you were doing. Certainly, Miami, I felt like wasn't in a position to really get into some things. They've just really been struggling. But again, I'll put the link below for everybody that you can see his website. It's evanmia.com. Let's talk about with where Miami's at. Like you said, very interesting team and that's what we're going to get into with some of the data. So Miami's 16-6 overall, 8-3 in the ACC. In your BPR overall rankings, they're 76th. It actually puts them 10th in the ACC. So can you just summarize where you think this team is again based on the information you have with your site?
Yeah, Miami to me is one of the most interesting cases of any team that's vying for a tournament bid this year because their resume metrics are so much better than their quality metrics. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, if we're being honest. They've certainly outperformed expectations, but it's been very impressive, and they're definitely going to be relying on those big wins going down the stretch. I have them rated at, in the 70s, which is a little bit lower than other quality metrics like Ken Palm have them. I think he has them at 63. But their strength of record and KPI, which are the two main resume metrics that the selection committee looks at, they're both top 30 there. So they put some really good work together, and especially given the state of the ACC, they are the favorites in a lot of their remaining games, even though I have them analytically in the bottom half of the ACC. I think they're still favored in, six of their last nine games or so. So they have the capability to get the wins they need to get in the tournament, and you never know what could happen from there.
Yeah, you touched on it. And again, what's interesting too is they play Notre Dame. They lose to Notre Dame on Wednesday. There, big one coming up against Virginia. But Miami's played and beat Duke and North Carolina. Those are the top four teams right now in the ACC standings. And Miami doesn't play any of those three teams the rest of the year. So you talked about the rest of their schedule, and I will definitely get into that. Those final nine. Where's Miami? Where are they finding their success? Essentially, what's enabled them to find the success and wins? Like I said, 16-6 with where they're at right now.
I point to two main things. I think the first is generally that their offense has been a lot better than their defense. They have a top 50 offense, and that could even be underselling it a little bit. They've been really good in a lot of good games. Their defense is where they really struggle. They're outside the top 100, about 118 or so right now in my defensive metrics. But the other thing that sticks out to me, and this is something that's really unique to what I've been doing this year, is tracking scoring runs. So specifically, I'm looking at teams in games who are going on 10-0 runs or better. So if you put up 10 points or more and you are not scored on during that time. And Miami, especially in ACC play, has been outstanding in terms of putting these scoring runs together, which number one allows them to put opponents away, but number two also allows them to always be in the game, in the mix, even if they're behind. So in ACC play, they've had 11 of these double-digit scoring runs, which is more than any other ACC team, and they've only given up 4. So that's a sign of a team that is, again, always in the mix to win a game and can put teams away and is not at risk in a huge way of giving those up. So that's something that's really encouraging for me, for Miami.
How big is that, Evan? And I know you added that to your metrics this year. How big is that, you think, for teams, especially as we get in this final stretch, these final games, in the regular season heading into tournament play? How important do you think those runs are?
I do think in some form it is predictive of future team success. And a team that I look at that had metrics that were looking really good, but was looking a little bit shaky in this whole streakiness category a couple weeks ago was LSU. Because LSU started out the season really strong, top 10, top 15, a lot of places, but they have given up a lot of these scoring runs in games. And this was something I highlighted a couple weeks ago. And now they've lost, 5 of their last 6 games or whatever because they are incapable of holding teams. So I think the fact that Miami is on the flip side of that ledger right now, in the sense that they have the capability of going on these runs and aren't as prone to giving them up, is a good sign of success going forward, especially with their schedule remaining.
So you touched on, you felt like Miami's one of these just interesting teams. Again, record with where they stand in terms of metrics, with what you have, almost one of those interesting teams of essentially hard to figure out. But you know what? The Miami fan base has had a hard time. I've had a hard time figuring this team out. This wasn't expected. Even the coaching staff coming into this year cautiously optimistic after what happened last year. They get off to that 4-3 start. Uh, you touched on some of their success, but offensively, Evan, can you point to maybe what they're doing well in relation either to the ACC when they're clicking? Essentially, what do they have that's going for them offensively that you see?
Yeah, I think part of that is the roster that they've put together. Again, some new pieces this year, especially in Charlie Moore, who I think has been the most impactful player, and I'll talk about him in a second. But one of the things that I measure as well is roster strength, which is a little bit different than team performance. It looks more at the quality of your roster. And Miami consistently this year has had a better roster analytically than their actual team rating, so to speak. So right now they have around a top 60 roster. And I think that really speaks to their consistency, especially on the offensive end. And I think one of the things that I look at a team level that has allowed them to be successful in a lot of their wins so far is in a lot of their big wins, they have keyed in on at least one of the two sides of the ball, either offensively or defensively. They've had a great performance. So, for example, in that road win recently against Virginia Tech, they had a great offensive performance. At Georgia Tech, it was on the flip side. They had a great defensive performance. And in a lot of their losses so far, they have not been able to put a good performance on either end of the court. In a lot of their losses, they've been below average both on offense and defense. So, for me, a key to their success going forward is clicking at least on one of those ends and then hoping the other can play well enough to win.
You touched on Charlie Moore. Let's go right into Charlie. A lot of fans are, obviously getting to see Charlie making his impact first season. One of the things Jim Larinaga mentioned the other day that, over the summer when he was doing workouts, he was surprised at his defensive abilities during the season because they just didn't see that over the summer. He's one of the top leaders in the conference in steals. I'm looking at your metrics here. So let's talk about with where you see Charlie and maybe the biggest impact or how important, if you could just judge his importance on this team.
Yeah, given how many years Charlie Moore has been in college, it's around 10 or so now. You don't expect a guy who's, played so many seasons to have this big of a performance jump, but he really has. Right now, according to my metrics, Bayesian performance rating is my metric that measures overall player impact, looking at individual stats, but also team success while that player's on the floor. It incorporates some historical information to make them more predictive as well. And right now he's 14th in the ACC in BPR, which means, he's in that top 15 most impactful players in the conference. And I think in large part due to his defensive effort. He's got the best defensive rating on the team by a wide margin. As you noted, his individual defensive stats have been really good this year. He's averaging a career high 2.2 steals a game. He also is a team best in adjusted team defensive efficiency. So this is a metric that looks at, while he is on the floor, how many points per 100 possessions is Miami allowing? And he's the best on the team, which means more than any other player on the roster, Miami is at their best defensively. He leads the team in plus minus as well, another indication that he's having a great impact. And then just in general, Miami is outscoring opponents by almost 24 points per 100 possessions. That translates to roughly 16 or so points in a game, more with him on the floor than when he's on the bench. That's a huge difference. So he's been a massive impact, especially on the defensive end.
And certainly, the wins above replacement stat is a baseball thing, but certainly I think people recognize the difference too when Charlie's off the court. They just don't get that impact at point guard when he's not. So it's just a combination of a lot of things with him too. Cam McGusty and Isaiah Wong have been the leading scorers. Isaiah led him last year. Cam's had this kind of resurgence, or just his best year of his career. What do you see with these two guys? And certainly anybody watching this video knows the importance of these guys to the team. But what do you see with these guys and kind of how they stack up and as guards in the ACC there?
Yeah, Charlie Moore has definitely been the big all-impact guy, but both McGusty and Wong, being their top two scorers, they're both averaging over 16 points a game, and they're doing it in an efficient way. McGusty's shooting around 47% from the field, Isaiah Wong 46%. Both are shooting the three ball just fine. They rate as the team's best offensive players in terms of offensive BPR, so they've definitely been carrying the load offensively. I do think there is a gap in their defensive impact. I mean, really, there's a big gap between Charlie Moore and the rest of the team here. So they certainly could pick up the slack some in that regard, but they've been carrying the load offensively, and that's been really huge for this Miami team.
Yeah, and the stats are available for everybody. The evanmia.com, you can check out all that stuff and kind of go through it, the team ratings. One of the things that has drawn me to your site is obviously the lineup analysis, whether it's 3-man, 4 or 5. This year's Miami seems a little different in the fact that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of decisions to be made in terms of player personnel. They've got their 5 guys. There's not a lot of argument that can really be made outside with their bench. But I'm curious, and we're going to talk. Let's get into kind of down the stretch for Miami, kind of success or keys for them. But I'm curious if there's a guy that in particular you're looking at outside of those top 3 guards that you feel like maybe X factor is the word, but just a key guy for Miami. Not one of those 3 guards that's key to their success.
Yeah, I think if I had to pick another guy on the roster who's been really key to their success and will be impactful going forward is Jordan Miller. His stats don't jump off the page like any of the guys we've talked about before, but he's been really solid, averaging 9 points, 6 boards a game, shooting 50% from the field. The big thing, though, with Jordan Miller, and this is what I love about the metrics that I put together on my site, is you can see impact beyond just individual stats. So he leads the team in adjusted team efficiency margin, which means more than any other player, the team is playing the best with him on the floor. And that's true on the offensive end as well. He's been the best player in terms of the team's offensive efficiency when he's on the floor. So even without putting up, double-digit scoring numbers, it's very clear that Miami is playing really well with him on the court. Averaging almost 115 points per 100 possessions when he's on the floor, which is a better mark than some other players on the team. And his on-off splits look great. The team's been really good with him on the floor. So I think he sticks out to me. And going to those lineup ratings like you talked about, one interesting thing that we can measure too is teammate chemistry. So you can look at guys who play together, how much better does the team play when they're on the court together versus their individual averages. And because of this, we can then evaluate how much chemistry, so to speak, 2 guys have. And the 2 teammates for Miami who have the highest weighted chemistry, which is basically looking at how well they perform along with how many possessions they played, is Charlie Moore along with Jordan Miller. It's been the best, the highest chemistry pair on the team. So that, again, speaks to the fact that, again, not surprising to see Charlie Moore in there, but him and Jordan Miller have really been clicking even better than they normally do when they're on the court together.
And certainly very interesting. If we could point to some reasons why Miami's been successful this year, obviously the guys are returning, things like that. But, you just mentioned the impact Charlie and Jordan have made on this roster. And certainly, the coaches were optimistic when they got these 2 guys. They weren't extremely high-profile transfers, but certainly they fit in quite well. Miami's got 9 games left in the regular season. Not against the current top teams in the standings in the ACC, but some tough ones. Virginia, Miami's lost 4 straight to Virginia, so they've got them still twice. There's some, Virginia Tech. I know that's a team that ranks still high on your ratings. How do you see Miami down the stretch? Maybe some keys for them to essentially stay in the tournament. And I do want to mention currently Miami's an 11 seed in your latest bracketology. Just what's kind of the key for Miami to get in the tournament, to stay in the top 4 in the ACC here?
Yeah, right now I think in terms of bracketology, they're on the right side of the bubble. They're about the ninth team into the field outside of that cut line right now. So they're looking good, and I think the big thing for them is, as you mentioned earlier, they've already gotten the hardest part of their schedule out of the way. So I would say they're favored in about 6 out of the 9 remaining games, and their next game, again, at Virginia. My metrics have them and Virginia as roughly equivalent in strength, but they've certainly performed way better than Virginia this season. So even though Virginia is probably going to be favored in that game, that's a very winnable game for Miami, and they've gotten some great road wins this season so far. I'd say their hardest opponent left is probably their game at Wake Forest, who's around 54th in my metrics right now. Again, a winnable game as well. Wake is another one of those teams that's really good at putting up scoring runs, so that's something to keep in mind. It'll be sort of a clash of teams that are capable of going on runs but don't give a lot up. Maybe one of those runs decides the game in that case. But I think really for Miami, if they continue with their overall performance levels they've had thus far in the season, I think they're going to be just fine.
Yeah, so 9 games left in the regular season. They could, like you said, they might be favored in about 6. 22 wins regular season, that would put them at that 21-22 if they can win, if they can go 5-4, 6-3 Do you feel like that's a good mark, kind of a good goal? That's either 6, obviously, if you get to 7, but just is there a number in mind that you have, Evan, that maybe might be more suitable for Miami down here?
Yeah, I feel like in years past that mark might be slightly lower, but because of the quality of the ACC being down this year, getting more wins is essential. I do think with the resume they've put together that going 6-3 would probably be pretty safe there. Maybe even 5-4, depending on what other bubble teams do. I think the big thing that I'll be looking for is, does their performance levels revert sort of back towards where a lot of these quality metrics, including my own, have them at much worse than what their resume states. So if they perform at the level that their resume has indicated, they're going to be fine, no problem. I do think that there could be a worry that they'll, the predictive metrics will start to, show their course and they'll regress towards the mean a little bit. But I don't think there's any reason why this coaching staff and these players should feel like they can't take advantage of their schedule. It's very winnable every single game. It's very much in their power. So I think they're in a good spot.
Evan, like I said from the beginning, I was excited to have you talk some college basketball, provide some knowledge and insight into this team. There's a lot to like about this team, especially considering how the past 3 years have gone. So exciting month, exciting for you, I'm sure, as the season kind of winds down here and things get really cranked up, a lot of attention on college basketball. So time is valuable, man. I appreciate you taking the time to talk, and we'll talk to you later, all right?
Sounds good. Thanks.